Schramm, who of course works for Facing History, was the lead writer on our resource book on crimes against humanity and civilization, the genocide of the Armenians. And he has told me about the amazing commitment that scholars from the Armenian community made as he wrote the book. Peter and Richard both reviewed every word in multiple drafts, and their work, Adam's writing, have allowed Facing History to help refute denial of the Armenian genocide. And this is, of course, the most important work any of us do. Peter Balakian's talk this evening will focus on Hollywood depictions of the 1890s massacres of Armenians. The international response to those massacres, as important as those responses were, weren't enough to stop genocides less than a generation later, but they did lay the groundwork for international law and for human rights activists even today. I know, you know, and Facing History knows, we all know that education is key if we are ever to hope to realize a dream of a world without these crimes against humanity and civilization. At Facing History, we include this history in our resources, in our professional development for teachers, not just during this centennial of the beginning of the genocide, but as part of our ongoing work every year. And in the last year, we've developed new mini documentaries on the history of the Armenian genocide, held workshops, including an online workshop for 450 teachers from 27 countries. I won't list them all, but they include US, Turkey, Canada, Indonesia, Italy, Mexico, Tunisia, Jordan, Kenya, Poland, China, Belgium, Ecuador, England, Peru, France, and South Africa. That wasn't all of them. You can go to our own website and see and share the work with your friends and colleagues. It's truly amazing. We hope at Facing History this evening's program entices you also to get to know us a little better. We have staff throughout the room. Patty Keenan is here, and Adam is here. Ilana Majarian is here, several of us. We're thrilled to be partnering on the event with friends in the Armenian community, including the Technion Cultural Association, the Armenian Mirror Spectator, NAASR, and the Armenian Library and Museum of America. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brooks. We look forward as an organization here to work with your staff and organizing events here in the library. At this time, I'd like to invite the Aram Arklun. Aram Arklun is the Executive Director of Tekeyan Cultural Association, which is headquartered here in Boston, and also is the Assistant Editor of the Armenian Mirror Spectator. We welcome you to Alma, and we will also look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Berj. I do want to thank, in turn, Alma for being such a kind host and allowing us to have this event in the wonderful Adel and Haik Der Manvolyan galleries, which are a fitting monument to the Der Manvolyan family. And of course, we're also very happy to have NAASR helping in making Peter Balakian's books accessible to you. And we hope that you all will take advantage of this opportunity after the talk to get your own signed copies of his books, because nothing is more important for an author than to have his books read, and it's also important for his publishers so that they will be happy to publish more of these books. So, but in any case, Tekeyan is very proud to be able to present Peter Balakian together with Facing History. And again, you already heard about Facing History, but I can't urge you all enough to support its activities, because it's one of the ways that we Armenians have a voice in the broader community. It's an important way of presenting some of the lessons that we've learned through bitter experience and to others, and to help make more understandable an important part of our history. And they do such an excellent job. They involve top-notch scholars of our community, and they're always accessible. So I'm very happy that we have them with us tonight as co-organizers. And finally, I'd say that Peter Balakian is one of a rare breed. He's a public figure as well as an academic. He's somebody who we're very lucky to have because he's able to raise an Armenian point of view in broader circles. He's appeared on PBS, he's appeared in very major American publications and media over the decades. And his work is really something that gives us a voice, an opportunity to be present in a conversation at a national level, and that's not something we can always have. And we need to support people like Peter as much as we can. And his works are seminal. They're read in colleges. It's The Black Dog of Fate. If many of you have not read it, you should. It's not only a prize-winning book, but it's a book that now is read by new generations again and again. It's being reprinted, and it offers a way as an American Armenian, or the American Armenian experience as a segue into understanding the broader Armenian experience. His work on The Burning Tigris explores how America played a role in the early years of the Armenian massacres and during the genocide in the American humanitarian movement, and how important that was for American history. And it's an largely unknown field, as well as, of course, for Armenians. And he's a very powerful poet, and we shouldn't forget that part of the strength of his work is that he's able to, his imagination and his way of expression, even when it's in prose, is through poetic imagination and poetic thinking. And poetry is too far overlooked. We as Armenians have a tradition of supporting poetry and poets, at least in Armenian, and to some extent it's carried through the United States, but not enough. I think it's a very powerful way of pithy and moving expression. He's somebody that is and also an academic. He's a Donald M. and Constance H. Rebar Professor in Humanities at Colgate University, as well as being a professor of English. He's also a friend of mine for over 25 years. We served on the ARA board together for many years, and I've been proud to work with him as a historical consultant on many of his works. So tonight's lecture is a very interesting one. We have a brief film excerpt as well as the talk, and then a question and answer, and then books and reception. So Peter, without further ado.
Give me 5 minutes just to reflect on a few things before I start. So we try to be mindful of the clock, but don't count this. First, immense gratitude to everybody who's put tonight together. Adam Strom, Aram, Berge, I, Mark, and NAASR, Tikayan and Beer Spectator, all of you. Alma's really a phenomenally beautiful and important cultural zone and nexus, a place of gathering where our community comes together to work things through, think things out loud, and I'd like to do some thinking out loud with all of you tonight. I'm really grateful for your coming out tonight. I'm glad, when we settled on December 1, there was some trepidation, ice, snow, etc. So I'm glad the weather's cooperating. Thank you for being here. And I'm very grateful, Aaron, for your introduction, and especially for noting the books for sale afterward. I mean, writers do work hard, and your support of the books matters to me. I am here in part, at least, with a new book of essays from which I will be giving a talk about from one of my chapters on Elia Kazan, and a new book of poems, Ozone Journal. And I will not leave tonight without reading a poem from the book. I'll close with it. The poem, it'll be a surprise. I'll close with a poem tonight. So both of my books are part of this. But really what's, a couple things to say. I mean, Boston, I think, has become such a marvelous cultural zone and nexus for Armenian culture. And I mean Armenian culture in a broad cosmopolitan sense. I mean, think of it. I mentioned some of the co-hosts tonight, but Alma, Takayan, Mayor Spectator, Carolyn Ugar's fantastic Armenian tree project, Ruth's project, SAVE, which I know was celebrated and saluted recently, Iowa, Barbara and Donald Talalyan's amazing Armenian Heritage Park, NAASR and all that NAASR does. I'm very grateful for Mark being here. Armenian Studies Chair at Harvard, and and so on. If I'm leaving anything out, I apologize. But this is really, and also if you have cell phones, it reminds me, I asked you to turn them off. I should start there, but when they go off, it reminds us that. So yes, there are all kinds of things all over Boston, and Boston is really, I think, a special place of high cultural energy, and I think also a place where there's a greater potential to take all of this and push it further. And again, that's something I'm happy to talk out loud with all of you tonight. And then, of course, we're blessed with the synergy between our community in Facing History and ourselves. A fantastic American original, a visionary educational project that Margot Stern-Strom conceived of, more than 40 years ago. I've had such a great pleasure to work with Adam, Margot, and many other extraordinary people at FHAO. I'm really so happy that Roger Brooks is with us here tonight, and especially given, the new baton that's been passed and the new leadership. Facing History has had a big impact on the Armenian Genocide discourse. It can't be overstated, really. And I can recall, it's a longer story, but I can certainly recall the early 90s, the mid 90s, the late 90s, the kind of evolution and the growth and the density of the discourse. And at each level, the Armenian narrative breaking through to new places, more scholarship, more knowledge, more disciplines, all intersecting. And then FHAO's terrific Armenian Genocide Study Guide for the classroom, 225-page book for teachers. I participated in the webinar that Roger mentioned this year. I came to FHAO. I did 3 hours of taping. Some of it was used for their global genocide education project. I heard from people all over the world, but who are using it. I don't know what happened. After I do my bit, you don't know. Hey, how's this playing out? And thousands of people using the Facing History webinar from the winter and spring of 2015. So let me just note the importance of communities and organizations coming together, and any ideas you have about the potential for more, because it's got to always be up. We don't want to be satisfied with the progress, and the progress has been large. And so the last thing I do want to just reflect on before I turn to Elia Kazan and the subject of tonight's talk is just very briefly, 2015 as a very interesting year of self-recognition for our culture. I don't mean to be presumptuous. I don't speak for anybody but myself, but I do get to see a lot of communities in the U.S. and around the world. And I think this is my 34th talk of 2015, and it's been, you know, it's been heavy. It's been good. I mean, I'm delighted to be invited to many colleges and universities and public forums. I've given 3 readings in Turkey in the past 12 months, and 1 in Diyarbakir, which I don't think I could do today, but I was able to do in May, late May. You know, I'm happy to talk about any of that, but I just want to say that I think if you had told any of us, and I think here I'm right, I think if you told any of us that the New York Times would run 3 full 2-page segments with color photos on the Armenian Genocide and pointing the finger at the Turkish government impunity and corrupt cover-up tactics, denial, coercion, we would not have put our money on that card around March 1, you know. But it did happen, and I think it suggests a threshold crossing in world opinion. I think the conversation has changed dramatically. I mean, it's not, you know, I mean, the challenges are real and many. Nobody's underestimating that, and I'm not being, you know, rosy-eyed in any way here. But I am noting, you know, looking back over several decades of work in this mine, that we are seeing a conversation that was not possible a year ago, several years ago, a decade ago. And it's gratifying to see how that emerges. There's a lot to say about how and why. It's a great work by many people and communities coming together and creating a density of knowledge and consciousness. And Dr. Rogers, you know, note that education is a major force in that evolution. And then other things need to happen too. And we can talk all about that, but I do want to note that I think 2015 has been an interesting year and one with some psychological rewards. Obviously, there are so many things, you know, that need to be accomplished, but it's a new conversation. Okay, so those are my intros. So tonight's talk, and as I say, the talk I'm giving is just a small piece of a chapter on Kazan's film America in my book of essays, Vice, with an S, Vice, like in the tool, Vice and Shadow, in which there are 4 big meaty Armenian chapters as well. I should mention that one on Charance, one on Gorky, and one on Siamonto, as well as on this film. You'll also find Bob Dylan and T.S. Eliot, Joan Didion, Robert Rauschenberg, Theodore Redke, Hart Crane. It's a fun book. A lot of my obsessions as a writer and as a thinker over the last 25 years are in this book. Okay, America. Let me say this. I want to raise the question about I want to raise the issue of the importance of this film. I want to ask the question about how and why it's gotten lost, and perhaps to add to that question, why has the film been misrepresented, or in some way, why has the core of the film's narrative been sanitized or ignored? And I want to show 25 minutes of the film. It's a 2-hour and 40-minute film. It's a serious piece of work. And then I'm going to show a piece. I'm going to come back and raise a few more issues about the history of the reception of the film. And then I'd like to have a conversation about it. I'm curious to know how many of you have seen it. Okay, so 20%, I'm saying, okay. Who has seen it in the last 5 years? Okay, a few, okay. Awesome. Did anybody see it in '63? Okay, cool. I did not. Well, I can tell you that in '63, as a 12-year-old, I definitely saw Tom Jones. And Tom Jones won the Oscar. But America, America was one of the 4 films nominated for Best Picture. Tom Jones won. Now, that's interesting, right? 1963.
I remember that.
Interesting year in our history for many obvious reasons, but 1963, in cinema history, a film that opens with the burning of Armenians in a church in a central Anatolian village in the wake of the Abdulhamid period massacres of the Armenians is a runner-up with Tom Jones, The Birds, and How the West Was Won for Best Film. Curious, semiotically even, it's a curious cultural moment. So maybe, worth reflecting on. I want to say something about Kazan. He called this his greatest work. I think it's I would argue that he's the greatest director of film and theater in the 20th century. And I say that because there's nobody who really crossed between Broadway and cinema, the screen and the stage. I mean, Death of a Salesman, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, a lot of 40s important theater, and then cinema in the 50s and 60s, On the Waterfront, Streetcar, Splendor in the Grass, Gentleman's Agreement, A Face in the Crowd. That's a great film, Andy Griffith's only serious film, but it's an extraordinary critique of American mass media and popular culture. I mean, look, East of Eden, it's an interesting story. Just think about Kazan working with James Dean is a really interesting story. I don't want to get sidetracked on this stuff because it takes me away, but okay. So Kazan is a monumental figure. I know there are people who are who don't like Kazan because of his failures in front of the HUAC committee in 1954, but I'm happy to give you my own reflections on that. I mean, that was not one of his best moments in life for sure. But nevertheless, the art he made was large, and this film he called his greatest. He wrote the script and he directed it, and it first appeared as a novel. Interesting to see what it goes for on Amazon, the first edition of America, America. Now, just to say in a nutshell, the film deals with the journey of a Greek boy, young man. I mean, Stavros must be about 18 to 20 years old. It deals with his journey out of Turkey between about 1896 and about 1900, during the Armenian massacres period. And the Armenian massacres are clearly an animating piece of the psychological motivation of the character's flight. And the 3 leading characters who are his agencies out of the Ottoman Empire. The film is set sort of in a village near Kayseri, where the Kazan family, Kazans are Greeks, where Kazan's family is from. Kazan himself was born in Constantinople in 1909, came to the States in around 1913, something like that. The 3 principal agencies are 3 Armenian characters. Vartan Damadian, you'll see Vartan in the opening 24 minutes I'm going to play. Then Ohanes Kardashian, and then the elderly woman Sophie Kababyan, and her husband, who's a rug merchant from New York. And that scene gets very interesting in the last maybe quarter of the film. So we have the Armenian-Greek synergy. And my chapter deals with, I call it the Anatolian embrace, Greeks and Armenians and Elia Kazan's America, America. Now, at the core of this film is really the plight of Christians in the Ottoman Empire. And the situation for Armenians and Greeks in particular. And Kazan, you're going to, I don't need to recite it, but you're going to hear Kazan do a very precise voiceover to open the film. And I think if we listen to that voiceover carefully, we come to be astonished at how so many high-end film scholars and critics have sort of failed to articulate what this film was about. In the New Yorker, on AMC, American Movie Classics TV station, where the film is often played on the 4th of July as a celebrating America film. Now, it's true, the character does get to New York City at the end of the film. I'm not ruining it for you, don't worry. It's not going to matter. You'll assume he does. But 90% of the film is set in the kind of Dickensian infrastructure of Ottoman Turkish life. Brutal, corrupt, wild, bizarre, epic. So I'm throwing, my essay is asking the question, why the disconnect? And we can all reflect on perhaps some of the reasons for the disconnect, or, we're talking about Martin Scorsese, Jonathan Lair, Foster Hirsch, and there are others who have brought passion to this film, but don't seem to have gotten. So I'm interested in recovering the film for a very broad discourse. I think I was talking to Adam about this, I think this is a film that deals with human rights in a way that's unprecedented in film history, at least in a U.S. film history. And I'm not, if I'm wrong, tell me. I'm trying to think of a film before 1963 that went to this place in the U.S. repertoire. I'm going to leave out German, Russian, Italian, Japanese film cultures. I don't know those histories. But this film does seem to me groundbreaking in a number of ways. Certainly, for those interested in the Armenian historical narrative, this is large, and you'll see why. Let me say one last thing before we go to the screen. One does want to contextualize this film in relation to the silencing of the 40 Days of Musadak film project due to Turkish coercion of the U.S. State Department in 1935. And I think you want to ask questions about Kazan and this Hollywood film of 1963 against the context of the 35 tragic failure of democratic institutions to work properly, frankly. Okay, so keep that in mind. I do think this film offers a lot, and let's talk more about that. I will say a little bit about the reception of the film after we look at these stars. So segment lights on. There's a scene, thank you for persisting and getting it to happen. The digital age is full of complexities. At a certain moment in the film, I don't want to give away plot, at a very pivotal moment in Stavros's journey, he says to his fiancée, I don't want to be my father. I don't want to be your father. I don't want to have that good family life, that good family life. All the good people, they stay here and live in this shame. The churchgoers who give to the poor live in this shame. Stavros, as you can see from the dialogue, understands the politics of being Christian in the Ottoman Empire. And in fact, he's going to educate his father and family. You know, he's going to be a force for their awakening. So, you may want to go back to that statement about the land of shame, the words of the protagonist. Very briefly here, I want to just touch on, because there's more of it in the full chapter that I hope you read, the reception history of the film, which I find peculiar, and which drove me to really write a full essay on this. I just, for the sake of history, I first gave the first draft of this essay as a talk at Aristotle University in Thessaloniki in the fall of 1994 at a conference on Greek and Armenian culture. And I forgot about the paper for a while, although I've probably seen this film, 100 times. I really love the film. I love it as a complicated work of art. And when you watch it, I think you'll find its aesthetic dimensions, its cinematic textures, its filmic properties exciting and interesting and engaging. And I'm sure you'll get involved with it as a work of art. Because if it weren't a work of art, we wouldn't be watching it. Only art gets out. The rest of the stuff doesn't. Right. So Henry Miller, the great novelist of mid-century, wrote to Kazan after the Oscar tally came out. He said, "I don't think the film, meaning Tom Jones, deserved it. It was good, but not great. Yours was great, even if not always good." Interesting, take. But Kazan, as I mentioned, referred to America as his favorite film because it was the first film that was entirely mine. He directed it and wrote it, and it's memoiristic. I think it's a pretty edgy opening. The VO that you heard, absolutely autobiographical. The film challenges the boundary between fiction and nonfiction. For example, he doesn't have everything quite right on the Ottoman Bank moment. Armenians didn't burn the bank, but there was a skirmish that resulted from their takeover. And while he doesn't give you total context for the Hamid massacres, his VO has meant to situate the story, and I would argue today in our new lingo, in a post-colonial context. Kazan gets the fact that Armenians and Greeks were colonized, and that this has resulted in the evolution of a deeply traumatic and violent history for the underclass. You'll see a lot more of that as the film goes on. Eli Wallach, the actor, called it Kazan's last great film. The critic Foster Hirsch called it his greatest achievement and one of the greatest films ever made. Okay, so people have waxed very passionate about this film. Hirsch goes on to say, it should claim its place in the American canon, and I want to show you that, on the latest DVD from the Time Warner Company, about which I'll say a little more in a second, there is an hour and a half of this critic, Hirsch, doing a really close analysis of the film. And when you listen to it, well, you'll have some interesting responses. Scorsese, when he launched his box set of Kazan's film, 2010, 2008, I can't remember the exact year, 5, 6 years ago, was very bullish on America, and Jonathan Lair wrote a very long essay on Kazan in the New Yorker, a piece of which I'd like to quote, because again, I remain questioning of the reception. The scene you saw of Armenians being burned in a church outside of Kayseri is commented on the DVD lit crit session afterward by the critic Hirsch. He's an accomplished film scholar, teaches at Boston College. He says that this scene is indicative of how the Christian religion has failed its believers. Now, when I first heard this, I really did a double take, and I thought, well, I can't be hearing this correctly. Would one comment on such a scene if one were looking at Cambodians praying in a Buddhist monastery as Pol Pot was massacring them, or Jews in a synagogue during Kristallnacht? I mean, it seems to me a completely non sequitur response to what is clearly a mode of mass killing, a targeted minority, unarmed, elderly women and children in a church. What's wrong? Where's the disconnect, is my question. Later in the New Yorker, in a long piece on the film, the critic John Lahr says the following. He notes that Kazan grew up in a family in which his father was intensely anxious and once told his son, "Say nothing, don't mix in. And Kazan recalled in his interview, "I was kept segregated. It's the segregation of a minority. It's the segregation a minority imposes on itself, but it was really the result of terror." Right? This is Kazan in an interview, perceptively doing a little psychobiographical reflection on his family. Now, what strikes me as weird here is why the critic Lahr, writing in the New Yorker, doesn't bother to explore or explain what the terror is. It's a pretty big statement that the subject Kazan is making. Now, since Lahr quotes Kazan in conversation with the French film historian Michel Ciment, and had to have read the rest of the interview because he quoted a piece of it, I want to read to you the rest of the interview. Kazan says to Michel Ciment, "The Anatolian Greeks are a completely terrorized people. My father's family comes from the interior of Asia Minor, from a city called Kayseri, and they never forgot they were part of a minority. They were surrounded with periodic slaughters or riots. The Turks would suddenly have a crisis and massacre a lot of Armenians, or they'd run wild and kill a lot of Greeks. The Greeks stayed in their houses. The fronts of the houses were almost barricaded, the windows shut with wooden shutters. One of the first memories I have is of sleeping in my grandmother's bed and my grandmother telling me stories about the massacre of the Armenians and how she and my grandfather hid Armenians in the cellar of their home." Now that's pretty detailed. That's pretty specific, isn't it? I mean, you can't get more precise than that. And you can see why Kazan, I think just from hearing this reflection on his childhood memory, his first memory, this is a very traumatic memory for the boy, I think led him to take the care he does in the film with the Armenian narrative. I mean, it's a Greek-Armenian story, and that's interesting. Why doesn't Lahr pursue what's in the interview? I'd like to get some answers, and I probably will send copies of my books to both of these people and see if they respond. When I picked up the new remastered DVD from Time Warner, and you may want to own it or you may want to Netflix it, because you should see the film, and I want to talk about how the film can be useful in the curriculum. The film says, the text on the back of the box says that it's a story, the saga of young Stavros who leaves his war-torn homeland behind to begin a new life. Now, the non-informed reader might not catch it, but the informed reader is certainly going to ask, what war was that? And since we know war is about opposing sides that have armies, usually nation states, we understand that there's something wrong with the text on the Time Warner box. Again, I think it's it's important that we who care about the narrative and the precision and the accuracy of history respond to the Time Warner people and ask for a better description. Well, those are a few a few of the oddities in the reception history that I chart in my essay, through which I'm also doing, critique analysis and some filmic analysis, as well as, historical and political analysis of the film, and what I regard as its complex and multi-layered importance. Let me stop here. And I remember I'm going to finish the evening with a poem, but for now, let's open the floor and have any conversation about the film and any of its implications that you would like. Yes?
One of the questions that it raises to me is that it seems that the Armenians and Greeks, we know they're distinct communities, but there seemed to be a difference in terms of their hierarchy within the Ottoman society, and in how they treated each other, that it wasn't always amicable, that they were, even though they were both Christian groups,
Right.
they were often at each other's, they were fighting each other. I just want you to elaborate a little bit about their relationship.
Well, first I would note that, like any work of fiction, which this is, even though it's, I think it does have overlays of historical and autobiographical dimensions. I wouldn't extrapolate from the story of Stavros' family in this particular village to the whole, enormity of the Ottoman Empire and Greek-Armenian relations. I'm really not prepared to make any nuanced assessments of Greek-Armenian relations without having real case studies of the regions and the areas. But you see here, I think, a portrait of fear. I go back to Kazan's own childhood memory, terror, Stavros' comment that he throws to the adults, shakes them up. The priest says, you heard what he said, and everybody starts mumbling with a little bit of anxiety. And you're going to see, as the film unfolds, the kind of deep intensity of Armenian-Greek relations in the story of the one character. And we're not going to extrapolate a vast historiography of culture inside the Ottoman Empire from the film, but the film at least allows us to see some piece of it. I mean, it's clear here that in 1896, the Armenians are on the chopping block in a very particular way, and that's a history many of us know, from the Sassoon moment of tax resistance and ensuing massacre through the mid-90s. This film is situated in that, and the more, if you're teaching this film in the classroom, you want to bring your students more context than the film actually does, except for Kazan's really nice voiceover at the beginning. People began to search for people who were, Kazan is definitely acknowledging the post-colonial predicament here, or the colonial predicament here of Armenians and Greeks, and the beginning of resistance to brutality and oppression. I mean, it's not a history lesson. It's a dramatic story, but there's a lot of history embedded. Yes?
When I was watching this, I felt that it was portraying the Armenians like we are terrorists, which, when the movie was made, terrorists had a different connotation than it does today. It's really, if we look at today, we took this to an audience today, especially an American audience, wouldn't that kind of give the impression that Armenians were the terrorists the way we define it today?
Well, I think that there's not enough in the film to explain the context of the 90s explosion, other than the Kazan voiceover. So if I'm teaching this film, I'm keeping Kazan's opening voiceover about colonized Christian minorities being oppressed by an unjust
It was the Armenian Revolution that the porter, the Hamal, and actually he was a revolutionary. Like he spoke in terms of social democracy, of friendship between the different groups, between Armenians, Greeks, and Turks. And that meeting that they had.
Right. So later in the film, but that's a different kind of revolutionary. Later in the film, when Stavros gets to Constantinople, he peripherally gets involved in a kind of Marxist labor organizing movement. And that's what Derhard's referring to. But that really doesn't intersect with the Ottoman Bank moment, although it's another kind of resistance to a very corrupt, sagging, falling apart empire. I mean, I can't answer how others might respond to this moment. My take is a careful teaching of the voiceover opening would prevent any simplistic reading of Armenians as terrorists. But you do need to teach this with care. But what's coming up is really interesting. In other words, the excavation of the brutal, I use the word Dickensian because I think of Dickens's great novels about, the brutality of industrialized England and the industrial capitalist system in England in the 19th century. Now you have to see the whole film and decide how you want to explain it. But I do think that any intelligent viewer of the film is going to look at women and children being burned alive in a church by a military and ex-convict, vigilante group. You heard maybe in the Rocky House the phrase, or somewhere, they're emptying the jail, they're opening the jails or the prisons, and that is very accurate. That was one of the mobilization for killing squad techniques. Yes, Mark.
Peter, I don't remember if you mentioned this in the essay, but in one of in Kazan's memoir, the name of which I can't remember right now, he talks about the Anatolian smile, he calls it, which we kind of see in this segment that you showed, and he describes it. It made a big impression on me years ago when I read this. He talks about his sense of shame at this Anatolian smile that his father would put on, that the smile that concealed a lot, and which was meant to show total servility and acquiescence. And I don't remember if this specifically even comes up in the movie, but that whole thing seems to permeate the movie, and it's again something that tends to get read out of the discussion, especially when we start talking about how everybody lived side by side as brothers in the good old days.
Yeah, well, I think you're raising a great topos here, Mark, and that is the film. You hear the question about the Anatolian smile, the smile being one of a protective shield of the minority subject group in the face of the majority oppressor group. And it reminds one of some similar tropes for African Americans in American life that were so deeply inscribed in minstrelsy and then in certain forms of demeaning comedy about blacks. And there's something universal about the idea, which will replicate itself, no doubt, in every culture where a minority group is forced to negotiate asymmetrical power relations with the ruling class, the dominant ethnic ruling group. And so I think the film explores the nuances of tensions between power asymmetry, in this case Christian minorities living in Islamic Ottoman society at the end of the 20th century as the whole thing has started to explode and the whole empire is coming down. I mean, you saw the scene with Watertown and the Turkish captain. Again, it reminds me of a scene you might have seen, master and former slave, you know, in Gone with the Wind, right? And all these roles are being replicated. This Watertown has to play a servile role to get them out of this moment. And Captain Jalal's response is the one of a slaveholder, you know, my little lamb, Watertown, my little lamb, what's become of you, and so on. I mean, I think this is very rich stuff. I think Kazan's a master of psychology on the screen. It's one of the things he did brilliantly in his films, and you find a lot of it here. And it's interesting because it does move into this history, and I think the film has a lot to offer all kinds of historians and scholars who are interested in Greeks, Armenians, Christians, Ottoman Empire.
You know, I love the echoing of America, America. I think you hear it 2 or 3 times during those opening scenes, right? They're talking about it at the very beginning,
Yeah.
and they're whispering it later. And as we're thinking about this, you know, you're thinking about what America means, and I'm thinking about the contemporary moment for refugees escaping.
Yeah.
And I think he's saying something very powerful about American identity. So I'm interested
Yes.
in hearing, what do you take that he's trying to tell us about American identity?
American identity. And that's a harder one in the sense
It's my job.
that, I'm not sure, yeah, I know, that's what it is. It's a harder one to do without the whole film in front of us. And especially, your question is most pertinent, I think, to the closing of the film.
Yeah.
The character does make it to the promised land, and the promised land is complex as well. And the harrowing journey in the last part of the film. I don't want to ruin plot here. But I'd rather focus on the earlier part of your question, that is that it is a film about refugee flight and the arduous, impassioned, relentless psychological strength of this protagonist to get out of Turkey. Nothing will stop him, and you're going to see the obstacles and the complexities, the violence, the things this kid has to contend with, but he will not give up the dream of America. Now, it's one of the reasons that the film is played on 4th of July on AMC, but I think it's miscast, and it, you know, again, it reminds me that I, among others, I hope you will write AMC and ask them to re-situate and frame the film if they want to show it. At least they should say something about the human rights violence in the Ottoman Empire, the plight of Christians to get free. And that, Adam, too, would intersect with the current flight from some very troubled, war-torn, violent Middle Eastern countries. So I think this film is in that trajectory. It offers a way into understanding the urgency of escape and resettlement. And in the bigger picture, the film's about that. Yes, Alcala.
Peter, you know, Adam, kind of reflecting on what you said and what Peter said at the beginning, that 2015 has been a year of recognition. I think this film, and this is not a, this is just kind of a comment that I hope we all keep talking about, the whole question of the Armenian identity now, because here we are trying to take positions on refugees that we hope, I hope people here feel that they have some kind of obligation to take a different role, not being a refugee anymore, towards people who are refugees at this moment. So it begs the question of our identity in these 100 years. I think I just welcome the dialogue on that, because it's a real changing opportunity for a changing moment for in terms of
And
our
you
relationship.
say it so well. I think it's really important, you know, it cuts into this film and to our cultural moment and to us as previous passers through of this journey. And, you know, as with other human rights, and my own feeling is as with other human rights crises, Armenians worldwide should feel some moral leadership in whatever way that works for people, whether, you know, for some it may be writing checks, and for others it may be getting involved in active organizations. But yeah, I think, you know, it's very pertinent. The film is very pertinent that way. It hits us as a community. It hits those issues. And they couldn't be hotter right now with the state of conversation about refugees. You know, to me personally, some of the conversation deeply disturbing in the you know, segregatory way. This film should be really used for that right now, because the Stavros journey is emblematic, I think, you know, archetypal, if I can call up that word. It is. It's emblematical, it's archetypal. And it's one that's helped define not only a lot of what the U.S. is, but a lot of what 20th century transnational societies have evolved into and are becoming more so in the 21st century. So, Ruth?
Well, I hear what America, America means to Kazan's characters, but for us today, I hear America, America as sort of as I hear the echo of Germany, Germany. And I think it's so easy for us in America, America to become what we have hated in others.
Yeah, well, I think that gets right to Carolyn and Adam's perspectives, that the film offers us a powerful 15-year historical perspective. You know, the fact that this is a film set between 1896 and about 1900, and we are here in 2015 taking this film in at a moment in which refugee crises are complex and ethically urgent. So I think, you know, I think the film needs to be seen a lot for those reasons. Yes?
I'm interested in the relationship with the Armenians and Greeks at that time, under the circumstances, as subject or persecuted minorities. But the Armenians were being persecuted in 1896. Later on in 1915, there were more massacres of Greeks. And it's just interesting how the Greeks, at that time, apparently, in the film, are distancing themselves from the Armenians.
Well, they are in this one moment, in this village, in this family's story. And again, to get back to the earlier question, I don't want to extrapolate a totalistic historiography of this issue throughout the Ottoman Empire. I mean, I think we all know that the Greeks will be subject to a lot of brutality in the coming 15 years. You know, from the boycotting of Greek businesses in Constantinople in 1913 to assault on Greek communities along the Asia Minor coast, and then to the, you know, near annihilation of the Pontic Greeks during the Armenian Genocide arc. So there's a lot to say about it. The film raises it, but again, I don't think the stuff. Yeah, Aaron, you want?
Just add something.
Sure.
There are a couple of questions on that topic.
Yeah.
Actually, in the Ottoman Empire, the Greeks and Armenians were played off one against the other, and their differences in religion, even though they were both Christian, they had different theologies and different church structures. So they were rivals, and when, for example, the Greeks rebelled to gain their independence in Greece in the early 19th century, the Armenians kind of took their place on the higher levels as amiras or as high-level advisors or bankers and things that violate the system. So in other words, that rivalry existed on the high level, and villages also, during massacres. Actually, the film is very accurate, and if you had to summarize it in a very pithy way, the relationship was like that.
Okay.
And even in the Young Turk period, when there was freedom of expression, they were not able to come together, even though a lot of times their interests may have been aligned. So
Right.
Okay. It's actually accurate.
Aram's a historian and his knowledge is deep, so that's interesting to hear your perspective on this and to see, in a way, I suppose, what you're noting is that, you know, the divide and conquer psychology, I don't think it was played out dramatically, but it's played out in more nuanced social status ways. I mean, these two groups weren't going at each other, but they're both dealing with a bad political, social, and cultural second-class citizenship. And the Greeks have a different geopolitical grid. They do have a country, and that also changes the dynamic. Yes?
Kazan shows us here, he shows the Greeks as gentlemen sitting around in suits with their fez and all. He does not portray the Armenians as cultured businessmen or cultured bankers or what have you in this village.
No, but I mean, again, I want to say that it is a story, and it has characters and a plot. So I don't want to extrapolate the whole history. I mean, we know that there are thousands of Armenian high-end merchants and traders and businessmen and professionals and physicians. You know, that of course is a historical truth. The film's not going there. It is. You know, it picks its characters, and there's limitations to that too, obviously.
The Greek village.
So that the characters aren't
Very few
represented.
Armenians.
There will be a wealthy Armenian family appearing in the last third of the film, but they're Armenian Americans, actually. And then you're going to have, it's true that the other Armenian characters are a bit mythic. Ohanes Kardashian is coming from somewhere near Ani in the Ararat Plain. And I don't want to get into the story, but you know, again, I don't want to read the film as a comprehensive historiography, but as a story in which some of these issues are dramatized in important ways. Yes.
So it's interesting. I think what you've done is you've really enlightened us in a lot of ways in thinking that the way this film was seen before. I remember when it first was revitalized in the early 90s, the New York Times wrote a piece on it, I think, well, it went on VHS. And it wasn't, it was characterized a little bit differently by struggle, but it's really a study of oppression, and I think you're right.
Yes.
What happens when the culture of power is very oppressive, and the behavior of ethnic minorities will become, everyone gets entrapped by the culture. Civilization sort of is, becomes very difficult. In America, as somebody said, that resonates. Is interesting because in parallels in America, especially with Black Lives Matter,
yes.
If it wasn't for the cities, we never would have gotten civil rights movement. Because when you live cheap, when you live in the places of Turkey or America, everybody knows your name, knows who you are, and you go to New York City and there's anonymity, and so the movement of the blacks from South to New York was a major reason Chicago controlled New York, I think, because you got some. And so America represented that. So in some ways, kind of assimilation is necessary. And so the son, I think, was fighting that resistance to, to become, inner parity with the Greeks or the Armenians, which we go through.
Right.
The more hostile the environment is, the more subtle.
Right.
Come together.
Yeah, those are really interesting reflections. I mean, I would emphasize that the film offers a lot in its exploration of asymmetrical power, oppressed and minority. In this case, it happens to be Christian minorities, Muslim Turks, but the film is, universal in that way. It takes us into that zone. And you also note something that's important to the film, and that is the film actually does deal with generational difference, and that it's the young generation that's perking. The family's going to change. They're going to become more, politicized. Stavros' father is going to give him the family wealth and send him to Constantinople. Okay, I mean, it's a piece of the plot. It's okay for me to tell you that. So, all those issues are at play here. I think is that it? Okay, so look, let me put it this way. I want to close with a poem. Then I'll be back here signing as many books as you'll be good enough to buy, and we can keep talking about these issues. But let me close with this poem from my new book, Ozone Journal. I'm really grateful to Aram for his conversation with me. That's in the new issue of the Armenian Mirror Spectator, as I'm grateful for all of Aram's work. And since this poem is from the new book that I talked about with Aram in that interview, let me read you a poem called Leaving Aleppo. I was in Aleppo twice in the last decade. The last time I went with the 60 Minutes film crew and the late great Bob Simon, and we did that segment that many of you have seen called The Battle for History. And so, if you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. It's February 29, I believe, 2010. It was a very special journey for me, that trip with 60 Minutes. That was my first trip to Aleppo. And now it is hard to believe that so much of the Armenian past of Syria is gone, or at least in ruins. Maybe it's not completely gone. This is called Leaving Aleppo. How did the sound of bells come over the cliffs when the silks on the racks strangled the air before they turned to clouds of flowers? That's how the day came with its pomegranate seeds and street screams. The priest who walked us last night through the Armenian quarter was missing by noon. The sky over the courtyard of 40 Martyrs Church was frozen blue, ringing with AK-47s and the bells that my grandmother heard in another day. We left our bags in the bedroom and wound up in the Boombox Cafe where workers in camouflage slumped over coffee and sweet pistachios. We rolled some parchment-thin pita in our pockets, grabbed the cracked olives. You ran into an empty building. I stayed until the jeeps and soldiers left, and some of my Armenian friends came out with jars of water. A tank was rusted out. Some cameras were still hanging from fences. Some fences rolled along the horizon. Thank you very much for coming out.
Very much, Peter. That was a great insight into both the film